Hello, this is Ziemovid about history and today I have podcast for you. This episode will have many parallels with the present, since it will be about the worst rulers of Europe in the Middle Ages. You will see that the things they did to detriment of their countries are still being done today by present rulers. Democracy certainly didn't help in this regard and maybe even made some things worse. I won't be direct. I will leave that for you. Tell me in comments which medieval ruler reminds you of contemporary politician. On the 10th place we have Andrew II, King of Hungary in the beginning of 13th century. Instead of basing the treasury income on royal estates, he began massively distributing enormous estates to nobles in exchange of an illusion of loyalty. This resulted in him losing most of his income, and to plug the budget gap, he had to debase the coinage and impose extraordinary taxes, and of course this way he enraged his subjects. In 1211 he invited the Teutonic Knights to Transylvania to defend the eastern border against the Cumans. Instead of merely defending the borders, the Teutonic Order began building castles and sought to create an independent state subordinate only to the Pope. Fortunately, Andrew was wise enough to see this and expelled the Teutonic Knights from Transylvania before they gained power. But unfortunately for Poland, the Mazovian prince, Konrad, was more naive. He invited them to his lands and thus brought a problem to Poland that it had to deal with for centuries to come. Andrew of Hungary announced the Golden Bull in 1222. It was a proof of his weakness and very big political error. In fact, he was forced into it by rebellious nobles, fed up with the lawlessness of Hungarian magnates, whom the king himself had bred. The Golden Bull gave the nobles the legal right to conduct armed rebellions against the king if he violated the bull's law. This provision paralyzed royal power in Hungary for centuries to come. Furthermore, he constantly launched military expeditions into Ruthenia, which he intended to conquer for his son, and continually lost men and money there, without any political gain. To make matters worse, Andrew allowed his wife, Gertrude, to appoint her German relatives to key positions in his kingdom. This led to such hatred among the Hungarian lords that they murdered the queen during a hunting party. And what did Andrew say to this? He punished only one man who was presented to him as a scapegoat, and he spared the main perpetrators, a clear indication of his weakness. On the other hand, perhaps he was also fed up with his German wife. Place 9. On May 29, 1259, King Christopher I of Denmark receives communion at the Cistercian abbey in Ribe and dies shortly after, complaining of terrible stomach ache. The abbot most likely ordered the assassination of the king, who had been in conflict with the Danish church for years. In these dramatic circumstances, the young Eric comes to power, but de facto the real ruler is his mother, known as Black Greta. She continues her internal struggle and raises her son with the feeling that an enemy is lurking around every corner. Denmark is in a permanent civil war, And as Eric grows older, he also faces significant financial problems. Therefore, he becomes fully involved in debasing Danish coinage, cutting off the ends of coins and re-releasing the defective coins, forcing them to be accepted by violence if there's any opposition. And this is how he earned his nickname, V Klipping, from the Danish word klippe, meaning to cut off. Now the Danes realize they had a thief king on the throne. Eric stopped convoking the traditional assemblies, altings, of the nobility and imprisoned the political opponents without trial. His situation was worsened by the fact that Archbishop played an anathema on him, and to free him from this, he had to pay a large ransom to the Pope. In 1282, the Danish nobility forced the king to sign a similar document with the English Magna Carta, but Eric has no intention of honoring these resolutions. Finally, on the Saint Cecil Eve in 1286, when Eric was returning from a hunting trip, he stopped from the night in a simple barn. There, dressed as monks, several conspirators sneaked in and stabbed him to death. Thus ended the reign of the worst king Denmark had ever known in its medieval history. Number 8. The reign of Peter I, known as the Cruel, king of Castile, shook the Iberian Peninsula. Peter took the throne at the age of 16. From the outset, he had to contend with powerful opposition led by his illegitimate brothers from Trastamara dynasty, sons of his father and his mistress, Eleanor de Guzman. One of his first victims was this Eleonora, whom Peter ordered executed, thus beginning an endless vendetta. Peter later married the French princess Blanche de Bourbon, but abandoned her just 3 days after the wedding for his longtime mistress. He imprisoned Blanche in the Lonely Tower, where she died mysteriously, likely on the king's orders, at the age only 22. This caused an international scandal and turned France away from him, a potential ally. But since the 100 Years' War was raging, the English were pleased with this act. Peter trusted no one and solved problems with his executor. His reign was a series of executions intended to intimidate the opposition, but they backfired. He personally ordered murdering his half-brothers. One of them was the Grand Master of the Order of Santiago. Peter invited him for a meeting, and then, at the king's signal, the guards massacred him in the courtyard of the Palace of Sevilla. Then the king sat down to dinner in the adjustment chamber, while his brother was dying. He ordered the assassination of anyone who seemed suspicious, including his aunt, uncle, and high-ranking officials. Another example, when the Sultan of Granada, Abu Said, known as the Red King because he wore a large ruby on his head, came to Sevilla seeking help and refuge, Peter welcomed him and then ordered his murderer to seize the ruby. Shortly thereafter, Peter himself fled to France when he used the ruby as payment to persuade the Black Prince to aid him. The English prince did indeed help him defeat the opposition in 1367 and regain the throne. Today, this ruby is part of the British crown. Despite the initial military successes, Peter's cruelty caused even his allies to abandon him. The end of Peter the Cruel's reign was as brutal as his life. After losing a battle, he hid in a castle besieged by his half-brother, Henry of Trastamara. Seeing no hope of victory, he went to his brother's tent to attempt negotiations. There, he attacked him with a knife, however, he lost the fight and left the tent without his head. 7th place. The son-in-law of Polish ruler Bolesław the Brave, the Kievan prince Sventopelk I, known as the Accursed, is one of the darkest figures in the history of Kievan Rus. He was born shortly after the Christianization of Rus as one of many sons of Vladimir the Great. We don't know exactly why Bolesław the Brave chose him as his son-in-law. Did he hope that he would assume supreme power in Rus? Or perhaps he knew that Sventopelk had been seeking to overthrow his father. In 1015, when the aged Vladimir dies, Sventopelk decides to seize complete power for himself. In medieval Rus and beyond, this particularly meant killing members of his own family. Two of his brothers, Boris and Gleb, fell victim to him at first. They quickly became the first saints of Rus, and Sventopelk became an archetype of the biblical Cain in the public consciousness. However, he fails to defeat his younger brother, Yaroslav, who gained control over Kiev. Then, Yaroslav attacked Poland, busy fighting Germans at this time, and did some territorial gains. But in 1018, after signing a peace treaty with the Germans, Polish King Bolesław the Brave attacked eastward to aid Sventopelk. Despite the military victory over Yaroslav and the capture of Kiev, this did not provide Sventopelk with a sufficiently strong position. He lasted only a few months on the throne before being overthrown and killed. Yaroslav now rules uninterrupted for another 35 years and is remembered in the chronicles as one of the best rulers of Rus, receiving the nickname the Wise. Number 6. Edward II's reign is widely considered one of the worst in English history, as it completely neglected the successes of his father, Edward I, the Hammer of the Scots. This monarch brought the country into the brink of military, financial, and political collapse, and his reign ended with the first dethronement of a divinely anointed king in English history. His father spent his life conquering Scotland, and his son squandered that effort in a single day. I'm referring to Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. Edward II led a massive army against the Scots led by Robert the Bruce. Despite numerical superiority and better weapons, the English suffered a humiliating defeat. As a result, England lost control of its northern neighbor, and Scottish raids began to ravage northern England, reaching as far as York. The king proved unable to defend his own borders. Piers Gaveston, the king's great favorite and likely lover, was rampart throughout the country. His arrogance led to a revolt by the barons, who kidnapped and beheaded him in 1312. Edward never forgave them for this act. But then comes someone worse. Hugh Despenser, the new favorite, who, as befits a gay man, was even more greedy and vengeful. His influence over the king led to civil war and mass confiscation of noble estates. In contrast, Edward II notoriously humiliated his wife, Isabel of France, by confiscating her estates and giving them to his favorites. Sent on a diplomatic mission to France, Isabella refused to return, began an affair with the exiled English baron Roger Mortimer, and invaded England in 1326. The English nobles, tired of Edward's rule, offered no resistance. The king was abandoned by everyone. He was the first king in English history to be forced to abdicate in favor of his son. He was imprisoned in Berkeley Castle, where he was most likely murdered. A famous, though controversial legend tells of a red-hot poker being shoved up his ass. 5th place. Andronikos Komnenus. 2 years of ruling was enough for him to earn 5th position in my ranking. To gain power, Andronikos cynically exploited the xenophobia of the people of Constantinople. In 1182, he incited a mob against the Latins, mainly Italian merchants from Venice and Genoa, who dominated trade in the city. This resulted in the Latin massacre. The mob murdered tens of thousands of Western Europeans, women, children, even elderly, and even the Pope legate was slain there. This event caused the West to hate Byzantium. The direct result of this hatred was the Fourth Crusade, which captured and sacked Constantinople, ending Byzantine's dominance. Otherwise, the West might have aided Byzantium and the Ottoman Empire would never have been established. Andronikos had no scruples about his own family. He ordered the strangulation of the rightful teenager Emperor Alexis II, whom he was supported to protect as a regent. Andronikos had previously forced the young emperor to sign the death warrant for his own mother, Mary of Antioch. After Alexios' murder, the 65-year-old Andronikos married his widow, the 12-year-old Princess Agnes of France. There was 53 years difference between them. He transformed Byzantium into a police state. He blinded, castrated, and hanged aristocrats en masse, often without trial. His paranoia reached such a level that everyone, from the lowest servant to the generals, feared him. He caused the state elite, instead of defending the emperor, to dream of his downfall. Preoccupied with slaughtering opposition in the capital, Andronicus neglected defending the borders. In 1185, Normans from Sicily invaded the Balkans. They captured and plundered Thessalonica, the second most important city of the empire. The massacre of the inhabitants of Thessalonica was a shock to the Byzantines, and the final proof of Andronic's inability to defend them. His rule was so hated that when the people of Constantinople revolted in 1185 and installed Isaac II Angelos on the throne, Andronicus was handed over to the mob. His death was one of the most brutal in history. For several days he was tortured, paraded around the city on a camel, beaten, spat on, and poured boiling water on his, until he was finally torn to pieces in the hippodrome. Do you think is this a fitting punishment for an evil ruler? Number 4. Ethelred the Helpless, or Unready. Instead of fighting Vikings, Ethelred systematically tried to bribe them to leave. He introduced a tax called danegeld, Danish gold. He paid the invaders astronomical sums, tons of silver and some gold. This was very short-sighted. The Vikings quickly realized that raiding England was a great business. They would take a ransom, sail away, and return the next year for more, knowing the king would pay again. The absurdity was that with English gold and silver, Danish and Norwegian chieftains bought even more ships and recruited more men for raids on England. Finally, Ethelred decided to address the Danish problem. In year 1002, he ordered murdering of all Danes living in England. Gunhild, sister of the Danish king Sven Forkbeard, was also killed in this massacre. This gave Sven the perfect excuse for a great invasion. This was no longer a simple raid, but it was a war of revenge. As a result, Ethelred lost his crown and had to flee to Normandy. But short after, Sven dies of excess alcohol during the feast, and Ethelred returned to England but was quickly dethroned again by Canute the Great, Sven's son. On the third place we have Phocas I, Byzantine Empire, in the beginning of 7th century, a usurper whose brutal rule nearly destroyed Byzantium. He was a simple military commander who exploited the discount of the legionnaires stationing beyond the Danube River to lead a revolt against the emperor. He marched on Constantinople, captured the city, and, before Emperor Maurice's very eyes, murdered his family and them himself. He recognized Rome's supremacy over the Byzantine Church, which earned him a beautiful letter from Pope Gregory the Great. Let the heavens rejoice, and the earth be glad, and let all the people of the Republic, until now sorely tormented, rejoice in your gracious deeds. All because the previous emperor, Maurice, had opposed the primacy of the papacy over the Christendom. Phocas was primarily occupied with terror and purging political opponents. Meanwhile, the empire's borders were cracking on all sides. Avars and Slavs were pouring into the north, and from the east came the Persian ruler, who, taking advantage of such circumstances, launched a major invasion on Byzantine territory. Had the Greeks not succeeded in overthrowing Phocas in 610, Byzantium would have quickly disappeared from the world map. On the second place we have John the Lackland, or Juan sans Terre, as French called him. John is often considered the worst king of English history. He was born as the fifth son of a very good king, Henry II Plantagenet. He had no hope of obtaining the crown, so out of jealousy he conspired against his older brothers. They gradually died, but one remained on his way, Richard. But fortunately for John, Richard preferred the Holy Land and Crusader glory than staying in England. So John tried to undermine his power during his absence. Finally, when Richard the Lionheart was returning from crusade through Germany, he was kidnapped by Henry VI. John offered the German emperor a handsome payment just to keep his brother in prison. However, a colossal ransom for Richard arrived from England and he was released. He returned home and John was once again cast into shadows. But 5 years later, a French crossbowman shot Richard accurately as he besieged the castle Chalus-Chabrol, allowing John to finally seize the coveted crown of England. His reign was marked by military and political defeats. He lost almost all his English possessions in France, including Normandy, earning his nickname Lackland. He was known for his greed and imposed heavy taxes on his subjects, which led to a baronial revolt. His conflict with the nobility forced him to sign the Magna Carta in 1215, a document limiting royal power, which paradoxically became a foundation of English liberty. He was also a paranoid and cruel ruler, accused of murdering his nephew Arthur of Brittany. And on the first place we have John XII, Pope and ruler of Papal States. Important note: most of these events are reported only by one person, a German chronicler who was very unfavorable to the Pope. However, even without these details, the remaining reports are terrifying enough. He gained the throne of Peter thanks to his father, who was a local, influential aristocrat. He was only 18 when he was consecrated. He turned the Lateran Palace into a brothel. According to eyewitness, the Pope Palace became the site of constant orgies. He slept with numerous women, including his vassal's widow, his niece, and his own father's concubine. But that wasn't enough for him. From time to time, he also raped women on pilgrimage to Rome. Besides women, he also enjoyed gambling. When playing dice, he didn't hesitate to invoke Satan to ensure a successful roll. If gambling involved, it's obvious that his financial problems also arose. He consecrated a 10-year-old boy as a bishop for a bribe to repair his finances. If anyone opposed him, he ordered their tongues to be cut off. Several cardinals lost their lives trying to intervene. When his position, due to numerous abuses, was already very weak, he summoned Otto I to defend Rome. The German king arrived, saved the Pope, and was then crowned emperor by him. And in such circumstances, the First German Reich was founded. But as soon as Otto returned north of the Alps, John XII began conspiring against him with the Byzantines and Hungarians. Finally, 2 years later, he was caught in the bed with a wife of a Roman nobleman. This man, in his rage, beat the 27-year-old Pope to the death with his hammer. Thank you very much for your attention. It was Ziemowit about history.